Good morning.
Oh,
Beautiful, beautiful morning here. It's uh it's snowing. Showed you the beautiful snow. And so we have to always find a sense of wonder. And the snow, whether we like it or not, can provide either a sense of stress or a sense of wonder. But that's not what I'm talking about today. Today I want to talk about an idea from this week's Torah portion. And as we like to do, I want to kind of give a little bit of a different perspective and maybe bring out an element from the Torah that doesn't get much views. For those of you who have a green thumb, those of you who like nature, uh, you'll like the you'll like today's class. So this week's Torah portion is a contractor's dream because it's the first time that I know of in recorded history that there is a conversation about building and building materials. We are building the tabernacle. And one of the materials that is front and center in the building of a tabernacle. And remember, this was in the desert context. This is in the middle of a desert. But one of the most important materials is cedar wood. The Torah calls it atzei shitim, cedar wood. And much of the structure and many of the vessels of the tabernacle were fashioned from cedar. I want to read a Rashi to you. Remember, Rashi is the foremost biblical commentator, and he quotes the Midrash. And I want to read this to you, and I want to use this as the center point of our discussion today. Rashi Rashi quotes the Midrash by asking a question that would be quite obvious, I think, to anyone. And that's Rashi's style. Is Rashi's commentary is for the 5-year-old. He asks all the obvious questions. So he says, how did the children of Israel obtain cedar wood for the construction of the sanctuary in the desert? Did you not think that even before I said it? This is Rashi's question. And he says, Rabbi Tamchuma explained, our father Jacob foresaw with his Holy Spirit that Israel was destined to build a sanctuary in the desert. So he brought cedars to Egypt and planted them, and instructed his children to take them along when they left Egypt. So they uprooted the cedars, and they had been carrying the cedars since they left Egypt. Now, we got a lot to talk about. This seems quite strange, right? Why carry trees from the Holy Land to plant in Egypt to use in a building to be constructed centuries later? I mean, I know that some people are really good at planning, but that's different level planning. And I would think that there is no dearth of wood in wealthy Egypt. And in any case, it could always be obtained for a price wherever their descendants might find themselves. I mean, if at this point the Israelites are quite wealthy, they had left Egypt with the wealth of Egypt, so they could have negotiated with some business people, and they could have gotten some wood there. It's not impossible. It's they wouldn't have been able to uproot the trees in the desert, but they could have gotten wood in the desert. And even the Sinai desert was not very far from populated areas. So they could have found cedar wood. It wasn't impossible. From from the day that Jacob descended into Egypt until the Exodus, it was 210 years. In life, I would say it's good to plan long term. I know people who pack for a trip a week before the flight. Some people I know pack a month before the flight. They're that excited. Not my style, but I can respect them. Yet to pack up 210 years before a journey, I think is a bit much. And so I'm just wondering this as we're having this discussion. Did Jacob feel that he needs to prepare the cedar wood 210 years before it was needed? Could he have not told his children, by the way, I think you're going to need cedar wood, maybe in like 150 years or 160 years from now, you should, when you're in Egypt, you should plant cedar wood. Like it's quite amazing. Uh, Imagine a fellow by the name of Jacob Isaacson, son of Isaac, Jacob Isaacson, and he's relocating from Russia to the U.S. in 1810. And he brings with him cedar saplings to plant in America. And he tells his children that one day in 2025, they might have to leave America and go build a sanctuary in the deserts. And they're going to need cedar wood. It would be strange. I mean, they could buy the wood in America. I'm just trying to give you a context here, how strange this is. And also, it's not like Jacob came empty handed. So he had nothing to take along but some cedar trees. Jacob, by the way, at the age of 130, was relocating his entire life, his family, his livestock, his enormous wealth to Egypt. And the last thing he needed to add to the wagons were cedar trees. So let me try to shed some light on this. Because the answer to this question, I was recently, lately, I've been listening to the recorded addresses of the Rebbe. And I've enjoyed just kind of listening to it, when it was, from its natural state. And thank God we have these beautiful recordings. And this recording that I listened to was an address was a talk for this week's Torah portion for Parshat Terumah, and it was given on the 6th of Adar, March 7th in 1987. And you can hear the emotion with which the Rebbe shared this insight. You'll see why I'm saying that, because I think it's a so here's the answer. The Rebbe suggested that it's intimated in the name of the sage who transmitted this tradition. Rashi quotes the Midrash, quoting this Rabbi Tanhuma. Now, as a rule, just so you know, Rashi rarely quotes the authors of the teachings in the Talmud and the Midrash. Not often do you find a name from the Talmud in his commentary, though Rashi often quotes the Talmud. And this is one of the exceptions, because it is the name of the rabbi who shared this teaching, Tanhumam, which explains why Jacob would engage in this seemingly unnecessary toil 2 centuries before his descendants would need the cedar. The name Tanhuma means to comfort or to console. Jacob, our father, knew that one day the country, the very country which has been so hospitable to him and to his family, the country saved by his son Joseph, he knew one day they would turn their back on the Hebrew tribe and transform their lives into a living purgatory. Egypt would impose one of the most torturous conditions upon the young Hebrews, which will later be known as Israelites after Jacob. Jacob knew that the people of Israel would need something to hold on to, something tangible, something to remind them that they don't belong here, something concrete to imprint upon their tormented hearts, that they come from somewhere else, and that one day they're going to leave this place and they're going to return home. A promise? Yes. He and Joseph promised the family that they would leave Egypt one day. But a verbal promise is insufficient, especially after 210 years. People can't live with words alone. Jacob needed to give them something tangible that could comfort them and offer a measure of relief as they walked in the valley of tears, as they watched their infants be thrown into the river. And it was the cedar trees. Jacob transported from the land of Canaan, from the land of Israel, young, tender saplings of cedar, and lovingly planted them in the soil of Egypt. And he said to his children that I want you to look at these trees, and I'm planting these trees because one day you will depart from this country. One day you will leave Egypt, and one day you will take these trees with you. Jacob dies. Joseph dies. All the siblings die. Then all the grandchildren die. And the first generation of Jews who still knew Jacob and his children, they passed away. A new Pharaoh began to enslave the young nation. Brutal labor. The extermination of Jewish babies began to become the Jewish plight. And throughout this entire horrific ordeal, the crushed Hebrew slaves watched these cedars grow. And with it, their hope grew. They harbored the knowledge that long before their enslavement by the Egyptians, these trees had grown in the soil of the Holy Land, and the land promised to them as an eternal heritage. Each generation of Jews pointed out these cedar trees to their children. They looked at the cedar trees and they said, that's our hope. And they transmitted to their children the direct instructions from Jacob to take these trees along with them when they left Egypt, because these trees are going to be a home and going to fashion and make and create a home for God. And so throughout their long and bitter exile, these cedars had whispered to the Jewish slaves, this is not your home. You come from a better place, from a loftier place, from a holier place. And soon you will leave this depraved land behind. And you'll be reclaimed by God and by a higher power as his people. Soon you will uproot us from this foreign land, and you'll carry us triumphantly to Sinai. You'll fashion, you'll construct an abode for the divine presence, which shall once again manifest itself in your midst. And these cedar trees, they stood as a sign, as a permanent, tangible, silent but powerful, a tall symbol of courage, of dignity, of the hope in a bright future. They gave a nation of tormented wrenched slaves something tangible to hold on to in a very concrete way as they struggled under their Egyptian oppressors. These trees, they offered the Jews some measure of tanchuma, of solace, of comfort, of fortitude during their darkest moments. When the Jewish people held on to Jacob's prehistoric, and I say that in quotes, cedar trees, for a brief moment, they felt free. And this is what you need in order to endure. It reminded them that in their essence, they were not slaves, that they didn't deserve to be beaten. They didn't deserve to be oppressed. They didn't deserve to have their infants murdered. They were free, and that one day they would see that freedom. I know you realize why I'm talking about this. It's in this week's Torah portion. It's not last week, and it's not next week. It's the Cedars. King David said, "The righteous shall bloom as a palm. As a cedar of Lebanon, he shall flourish." It's in the Tehillim, it's in the Psalms. Jacob planted cedars in Egypt, and God plants exactly such cedars in our midst throughout our long and turbulent history. These are those moments, those glimmers of hope and faith. It could be a righteous person, a Rebbe, a tzaddik, a spiritual giant. It could be a King David. It could be uh, uh, the great women of our past and our present. It could be the people who we turn to as a symbol of hope and faith. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning yesterday to attend one of the most devastating and difficult events I've ever attended in my life. And to listen to Yarden Bibas, the strength and the courage as his wife and children were buried in a private funeral that was attended by about 300,000 in person and millions around the world. That's a private funeral for a hero, for heroes of the Jewish people. He's a cedar tree. They're cedar trees. To have such strength through such a difficult time, it's unfathomable. To have we live in a world, we're part of a people that respects and honors life to such a level. To such a level. And then you have few that shine. That's our cedar trees of hope. Our ability to tower above the transience and the turbulence. A hope in a better world. A hope in a future. A hope in a world that is without strife, without babies being murdered. Every single time I heard any of the major media sources, I had to turn it off. I couldn't handle it anymore. That they died in captivity. They were murdered. They were strangled in captivity. We died in captivity. But within all this difficulty, there's hope, because that's our people and that's who we are. We always have a cedar tree to hug. There's always hope. There's always the knowledge that we whose feet stand on the earth also have the ability to touch the heavens. That our subjugation, our subjection to the temporal, to the mundane, that seems to overwhelm us in the moment, we have to look at the cedars that are planted in our midst. And with this, Jacob gave us a beautiful tradition of hope. And it's been the symbol of our people since that time. There was no question that the slavery in Egypt would end. The question was when. There was always a hope the slavery would end. But when? We know this is not our greatest time, but we know this will end. We know we have such a great hope. We hold on to those cedars. We remember who we are, and we remember what we're capable of becoming. Today, the leadership is left to you and I. The Rebbe spoke about this so many times, that the great leaders of the world are gone. Yet we are a generation still that remembers the great leaders. We know what it looks like. And yet, I don't know why it's so difficult for us. Maybe no one ever told us, but so difficult for us to step into the role of leadership, to be the adults in our generation. That's the challenge of us, that we need to be the adults. We don't have to grow up, but we need to be the leaders. We need to carry that Jacob Tanchuma, that Jacob comfort, that symbol of hope. We have to look at those who are struggling and say, I know it's difficult right now, but good times will come. Because we are people that have hope. This cannot last forever. Good times will come. I know it's difficult right now. I know it seems, when you're in the moment, how can this be happening? And we question, and we have existential questions. But that transference of hope and the symbol of us, we, who am I? Doesn't matter who I am. I'm living today. And somehow, amidst all of this difficulty, I have to rise up above it. And I have to say that there is hope, that all of this is temporary, that we have a beautiful world. This is a beautiful world, and it will become a beautiful world. As difficult as it sounds, as hard as it is to fathom, when living through such a horror, I know for many of us, for the Jewish community and beyond the Jewish community, for so many of us all over the world, since we found out the truth of the Bibas children and Shiri Bibas and the past week and a half, and then now the funeral, it's hit a lot of us. It's hit me. It's hit a lot of us much harder than other things. Just, they became the symbol, and there was always a hope that they were alive. And still, we have a call. We have the call of the cedar. We have to hug the cedar, and we have to hold on to hope, as difficult as it is. That's what's asked of us. And when people around us start talking of defeatist ideas and things that we shouldn't be saying, we have to rise above that. And we have to say, the cedars, the hope, it's a gift. It's an inheritance that was given to us by Jacob, who even when they went into exile knew that Passover would come. And every single year, since they were redeemed, we sit around the table. And it's going to happen soon. In about 6 weeks, we're going to do it again. And we're going to say to our children, and we're going to say to our families, that this is what happened to me when I left Egypt. And we're going to rejoice, and we're going to drink, and we're going to eat, because that's what we do best. More the eating, less the drinking. And we're going to say it again, and we've said it every single year for over 3,000 years. And then we're going to turn to our children, to our families, and say, you know why we're rejoicing? Because our people had hope. And we're going to say to them, even during this time, we can still rejoice because we have hope. We have the cedars. And may they provide that sense of comfort. May we all be comforted. The Jewish people today be comforted with the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. May the Bibas family be comforted as they sit Shiva today, their second day of Shiva, with the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And may we continue to have that hope and that faith and see that good times will come, and we too will be able to have a new Passover, a new celebration of freedom. And we'll eat because we know how to eat, and we'll drink because we do that too. Shabbat Shalom.